and we have about 3 minutes before we're going to get started. We're streaming now live on YouTube. So this will be available on YouTube afterwards. It'll also be available on our website. And I'm Kathy Wolf, and I'm joining from Wadsworth, Illinois, and Judith is here from Connecticut. This is Be Strong Families webinars. Andrew is here from Minnesota. And this is Be Strong Families webinar series, Staying Strong and Positive for Ourselves and Our Children. And we're here daily. So as you come into the room, if you can do like we did and Myra did and Anna did and Lawan did, and just kind of, go to the bottom of the chat and click the second item, panelists and attendees. That's really important. And I find like, no matter how many times I say it, it still we don't get everybody doing it. But we really want everybody to be able to see what you're saying and not have it just go to panelists. So if you don't intentionally click the second one, then your comments are only going to go to me and Judith and Andrew. So please, hello, Gladys and Tammy. Nice to see you. Welcome back. Hi, Amy from Alabama. Amy, you need to click. Nobody else can see that you're here. So if you do that chat thing and click the second one on the drop-down menu, panelists and attendees, that will really help us. This is kind of part of the housekeeping before we even get started. Hi, Hannah from Pittsburgh, California. I don't know where Hannah, I'm not sure where Pittsburgh, California is. I know Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania very well. Hi, Janan. Janan is here, but if you can click the second item on the scroll down, panelists and attendees, that would be really helpful. Jennifer, welcome back. From Sonoma, California, soon to be DeKalb, Illinois. Oh, and Andrew's going to tell me where Pittsburgh, California is. In the East Bay. In the East Bay. That's interesting. I thought I knew the East Bay. And I didn't know Pittsburgh. Oh, well. And car. Ooh, I love that. That means does that mean you're Sikh, Hannah? Is that a personal question? I have a spiritual name that has car at the end of it, so that's why I'm asking. Anyway, it's 12 o'clock, so we're going to get started. 12 o'clock here, 10 o'clock other places, 1 o'clock on the East Coast. And we are wrapping up our 4-part series on navigating grief and loss. Watching others grieve is today's topic, and I'm here with Dr. Judith Ehrman-Shapiro. Greetings, Judith.
Hi.
Dr. Judith, it's wonderful to be with you again. I've really enjoyed this week. If you've been here for previous webinars with Judith, please answer the poll, yes or no. Either way, it's fine. We just like to get a sense of who's in the room. We should do this later because it always
will come in. Yeah,
people come in, and then we get a sense of the first 20 people, but we don't get the whole group. But anyway, I just wanted to say that the format for this week, as those of you who have been on all week kind of know, is that we're not driving it with PowerPoint mostly. It's mostly conversation and information that comes from Judith, who, with her kind of clinical hat on, with her therapist hat on, Judith is a wealth of information on grief and on trauma. And Andrew's going to put in the chat other recordings. It is putting in the chat other recordings that we have that Judith has shared with us. From the beginning of the pandemic, she gave us some great grounding information on grief, and there are solid PowerPoints to accompany that. She also did a great series on changing the frame for trauma and growth and after adversity, after trauma. I'm not saying it exactly right, but Judith,
thriving after adversity. It doesn't matter. It's got a lot of different names.
Yeah. Okay. So those are also available on our website. But today, we just really need all of you to participate in order a corrective perspective on empowerment after trauma. Thank you, Andrew. And we need all of you to participate because this is the format. So there are two ways to engage. And the first one you're already using if you've said hi, which is the chat. And the chat is available to all of you at all times. You can put questions, you can put comments, you can respond to answer questions, you can, whatever you need, the chat is yours. The other way to engage is to raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, Andrew, who's in the background, our amazing tech support guy, will unmute you. You'll need to unmute yourself and then you'll be able to speak. And we've been blessed by that kind of participation this week. So you're very, very welcome to share with us. We won't be able to see you, but we will be able to hear you. So 73% of the people here now have been here previously this week, Judith, and 27% no. So we still have some newcomers, which is great. And all of the previous ones, which were on, kind of a grounding webinar on Monday, on Tuesday, we talked about.
We did styles of grief.
Styles of grief, and yesterday was self-care and grief.
Right.
So again, in recognition that we co-create this safe space together, and all of you are as important as Judith and I and Andrew are to making this go and be a good experience for everybody, we have agreements. And these are the agreements for today. If you would just take a moment to read them, and then if you agree with them, do like Tammy's done and type "I agree" in the chat. When we have enough people agreeing, we will get ready. We will turn it right over to Judith. Few more agrees. Awesome. Now, some of you who agreed, I'm just going to say this for the last time. Some of you are still putting your comments to panelists only. I really need you to go and check and go into the chat and check the drop-down menu and select all panelists and attendees. Otherwise, I'm like Sheila and Melinda and Lucia. I'm going to just take anything that comes to panelists and assume that it's private, and that if you intended it to be public, it's going to say to all panelists and attendees. Yay, Janan, you got it. I'm so happy. And yay, yes, Lucia, yes, Joy, awesome. Thank you so much. And Judith, thank you so much again for being here. I'm delighted to welcome you and just thrilled for this topic today.
It's been such an honor. It's always such an honor to come and participate with this community. That's for sure. And so we've been starting each of our webinars this week with a moment of physical grounding. And I just want to say a word about that. What happens when we talk about grief, particularly when our own experiences are closer to the surface, it's very possible that we get stirred up. We begin to feel stirred up or uncomfortable inside. And one thing that can help us is to do some physical grounding, just to really feel we have stability in the body, that we're connected to the environment we're sitting in, and that we feel safe. The other thing is, if you know anything about the central nervous system, there's the parasympathetic, which is our fight, flight, and freeze. And there's the other side. This is an oversimplification, but anyway, the other side is our rest and digest, really taking things as they come. What happens when we participate in an evocative conversation is sometimes things tip into the fight, flight, freeze. And one thing that we can do is really kind of evoke our safety, our as Kathy always says, just take this at your own speed. Tune out for a while if what we're talking about is upsetting you. Turn it off, turn it on, do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And certainly if the conversation is really upsetting, please seek someone else out to talk to, a friend, someone in your family. If you do see a therapist like me, just so that you can take care of yourself. We talked about self-care yesterday. So we're going to begin with our grounding. And remember that, and today I have my dog Molly, who I have to step over to safely get on the other side of. This is Molly right down here. And we've been saying this, and I'm going to sit on the floor today. We've been saying this, we've been saying, feel comfortable to sit in your chair and just use your head and neck. Feel free to stand up and do this from a standing position. I thought it might be fun to throw a little variety today and do it yoga style. So here I am sitting in the floor in a posture, believe it or not, called Sukhasana. It's just easy sitting posture. And if your hips don't want to do this, that can be Sukhasana too, or this can be Sukhasana. It's just a way to kind of sit on the ground and really be connected through the spine onto the earth. And for a moment, if you want to just take your hands and put your hands on your seat or on the ground around you, and just become aware of that stability, that which holds us up, that which is there and consistent for us. And if you'd like, take a deep breath in and an exhale through the body, really sensing the floor beneath you. That's grounding for you. That's really grounding. One more time, big breath in. If you want to soften your gaze or close your eyes, just feel the stability, the steadiness underneath you in your chair or the floor. And we're going to do a good old-fashioned forward fold. So putting your hands actually in front of you and just starting to slide them away from your body. Remember that sliding them away means you just mean dipping the head down, or it may mean really just letting the spine relax closer to the floor. Just allowing the body to fold into itself and be supported. And take 2 sets of deep breath here, if you can, if that feels right. Every time you exhale, just letting your weight into your supporting surface and noting the steadiness there. And one more time, big breath in. And as you exhale, just note that steadiness and let go of anything you feel you can. And then connecting to your center and to the bottom of your spine, begin to bring your body back up to neutral, whatever that means for you, whatever posture you're sitting in. Just feeling that steadiness, supporting the rising of your head and the rising of your body. And we're going to let ourselves lean back a little bit. So it's okay to lean back, drop the shoulders, open the throat, the heart, the head, extending the spine. And then as you feel your exhale come on, just finding that neutral again, whatever that means to you, that upright posture. And then we're going to take our leaning to the side. So you can use your upper arm or just lean your head, ear to shoulder, let the body come across. What you want to do is anchor in the opposite hip. So you really feel this opening in the side of the body. This is called lateral flexion of the spine. And then as you begin to straighten up, reaching your fingers straight up before you go to the other side, just feel how tall and decompressed that spine is. Turn your palm, exhale, just let it lower down to the ground. It's that simple. So here we go, other side, big reach up and then over. Remember, you can do this without the arm over your head. You can just tilt to the side. And again, feeling the opposite hip. And notice for yourself, does my right side feel like my left side? Very often the sides of the body feel different. And when you're ready, inhale and rise to decompress your spine and exhale to fall. So we're just going to twist. This is the last part. And we're going to start like this, touching the fingertips right in front of us. We're going to begin to open the left hand or whichever side you want. Let your eyes follow the hand as the hand reaches all the way around towards the back. Feel that beautiful twist in your spine. And when you're ready to exhale, just wave that hand, arc it right back, touching the fingers of the other hand. And then when you're ready, we'll go again to the other side. Eyes watching hand. Feel that steadiness beneath you, allowing you to just twist right on top. Big twist here. Exhaling like closing a big bellows. So that you close right in front of you. So just lowering those arms to a comfortable position, maybe taking a few rolls of the shoulder. Notice any tension in your jaw, in your face. Just take a moment to let that all kind of sink down. And then we'll get ready for our conversation. I'm going to walk back over my dog Molly and into my chair. So today our focus is watching other people grieve. And I thought we might start the conversation. You know, I asked myself the question, why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to watch other people grieve? And I came up with just 3 things. I'm sure there's more. One is that because we are compassionate, because we're empathetic, because we care about other people, and because when other people hurt, this is all under number 1, we hurt as well. And did you know that there are actually neurons in your brain that are called motor neurons, mirror neurons, where when we see emotion in somebody else, we actually feel it ourselves. We very often feel it. So mirror neurons, motor neurons, we feel what other people feel literally in our bodies. And sometimes it's harder to watch other people grieve than it is to take care of ourselves. There are those moments. We also, when we watch other people grieve, part of that compassion is that we care about them. We feel connected to them on a level where we feel love or like or concern, or we feel a certain amount of attachment to them and what they're going through. So that's one reason. But the second reason is that the truth of the matter is we have limited control, right? We have a limited control of how we influence other people around us. We want them to be okay. We want them to thrive. We don't want them to suffer, but that's a very personal experience, grief. So we run into this wall where we want to be in control of this situation, but we're really not. No matter how close that person is to us, we can't protect them from experiencing life. And the third thing is that we may feel responsible. We may be literally a caretaker. We may be, a caretaker of people older or younger than us. We may be a teacher, a therapist, a friend, a clinic, somebody who runs a clinic, and we have caretaking responsibilities. So what happens in the bereavement process is things are very chaotic at first, and we want to move them into stability, but we're contending with chaos. That's how it begins. And when you're a caretaker, it's a very, very difficult thing to handle. So those were 3 things that I thought about. I don't know if other people have other ideas about why it's so hard to watch people grieve.
I was just writing what you said in the chat, Judith. Give a second for people to reflect on why it's difficult to watch other people grieve. I know for me, it's not that difficult to watch other people grieve. I mean, I guess,
Really?
I mean, I guess it's just, if it's, I mean, I think what's harder for me is, and if I'm honest, what's harder for me is to remember that the grief is going to go on for a long time and to be continuous. So patience, you know, which you defined yesterday as the calm endurance of suffering, like to be patient with people's grief process and to continually show up in a compassionate way is something that I contend with, even as I know that, you know, we can't put limits on it. We shouldn't put limits on it. You know what I mean? But that's hard for me. But just being there when someone is in pain, I don't know. I feel like maybe I just developed an ability to hold space for that. And I'm actually grateful when they're able to feel the feelings, you know? So I'm actually finding that I feel like part of, and maybe that's how I feel effective, is I feel effective when people are grieving as opposed to not grieving. you know?
You know, I would challenge that just a tiny bit, but I don't want to put you on the spot. But yesterday, you know, you spoke about seeing your adoptive child go through a grief process. And I thought I saw pain in your face, but you know what? Maybe the pain was exactly what you're saying, is that it went on.
Well, but it's not that I don't feel pain when I mean, I don't feel pain or empathy. I do, but that's not hard for me. Like I don't experience that as difficult. I think that comes from with the territory of loving. Like, I guess that's in the place that I am. It's very, I don't know, maybe I'm just using the words incorrectly, because I do feel pain, and I do, you know, I do suffer with my children when they're suffering. You know, it's not like, but I don't find it difficult to do that. It feels natural to do that, you know?
You know, you have a great capacity to feel emotion and to be with strong emotion. So that makes sense to me with you.
Cultivated. It's also cultivated over time. And I think a lot of our people here also are caregivers, or they provide services to families, and, you know, like doctors, you know, they can't, I'm not saying that they have to, I think they're only good if they still have empathy, you know, like they can't get off there, but they have to be able to, you know, manage that empathy in order to be able to be effective. So I think it's like, how do I want to be as a friend? You know, how do I want to be as a mom? You know, and needing to be that for the other person. I feel like when I'm capable of doing that, I'm on the right path. I don't know if that makes any sense.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
So I guess I also wanted to like bridge from yesterday, because I don't see a lot in the chat yet. So one of the questions, Kara asked this question. I don't know if Kara is still on today or not, or if she wasn't able to join us, and I misinterpreted the question when she put it in the chat, and you got it correctly, which is that, what about children watching us grieve? You know, how do we deal with as parents, or as, you know, people in families when we're grieving? How can we deal with that in terms of like how it impacts our children? How do we explain it to them? How do we, you know, allow them to not to put too much on them, you know, as children? And I do see Amy has a comment in here. My observation is that I can handle the emotion of others better when there is not a personal tie. A professional relationship makes it easier.
Right. Oh, I agree so much with that, Amy. I mean, that's part of my experience as well. Like, it's kind of like when it's my kids, the gloves come off, you know, I become all protective mother bearish, and it's not just my kids, but I understand what you're saying. Whereas I'm able to have a little bit of remove in my professional role. So I do understand that.
And Tammy says, I find I do very much feel others' pain, but I found I had to learn to disconnect particularly with the work I do with families. Without this tool, I would burn out fast. And I can still approach the situation with caring, love, empathy, but I have to remind myself that it isn't mine to take on. And I'm resonating with that too. It's like, but I learned how to do that with my son because it was very, very difficult. Like his journey was very difficult for him and for me. And the only way I could be effective as a parent was to separate myself from his journey and to say, this is his journey. It's not my journey. And my intervening in it over much is going to stop the process of healing rather than like allow it to happen. So,
Right.
I mean, it was precisely because, it was so hard,
Right.
let's see, Luan says it can affect me emotionally when I experience the type of trauma or loss personally. Yeah, like that whole thing of being triggered, somebody else is going
That
through
is such a real thing, is that if things are similar, there's a similar circumstance, we can get very triggered into our own material, which again is something that's hard to stand apart from.
And Tammy says, right, I can more effectively support if I don't get too tangled up in it. So not getting tangled up in the other person's grief, but just realizing that this is theirs. And actually some of the most powerful, I don't want to say too much about this, but I was in a circle of people once where what was happening, each person was in the middle for a period of time, and what they were going through was extremely intense. And our job as space holders in the circle was just to be there and keep the person safe and witness it. Okay.
Witness.
And also to keep safe, but not, the instructions were not to, what do you call it? Have leaky feelings, like not to like overly involve ourselves in the other's process or try to fix it or make it better. And I experienced it as such a sacred thing, such a privilege and an honor to be able to hold space for allowing someone else a full expression of what they were feeling. And I realized it's so rare that we allow someone to release everything that they have inside, like scream, yell, carry on, like cry, like laugh, like, dance, like whatever it is, whatever they need to do, like, but have a community around you holding space for you to do that and not putting themselves into it feels like such a gift. And I felt
That's
it from the receiving end, and I also felt it from the giving end, that it was a gift, to be able to be in control enough of my energy that I didn't impinge on someone else, and at the same time be able to hold it so that they could do what they needed to do.
It's I'm sitting here thinking like a bunch of things at once. Yes, what a privilege. That's amazing experience, Kathy, that you had. But also, like, it's a slippery slope, like that line between disconnecting and then losing the authenticity of your own personal response, and sharing that with another person. I think about something like relational cultural therapy, which is a feminist, a kind of version of humanism, where you take it kind of a step further, like I have to be a person in the process, even as a therapist. Mm-hmm. So I'm removed, but I retain my authenticity, but I give you space to be yours as well. And all of that is good. It's just something we need to practice,
Yeah. Janine says it's the difference between empathy and sympathy. And Tammy says, I completely agree, a very fine line, almost seems like an art form. Yeah. And I will say from the receiving end of therapy, when my therapist, like when I can tell that he is feeling, or when he says, when I feel like him feeling what I'm feeling and expressing how it makes him feel, and empathy, saying I'm sorry that you had to go through that, or understanding the weight of it, like having somebody be there with me and reflect back the quality of the feeling that I'm feeling, that's been huge for me also. So I think I get what you're saying in terms of the feminist relational therapy, like in therapy, or, one of my sisters or my mom or a good friend, when they are there with me and they're really hearing me and they're allowing themselves to feel what I'm feeling or feel whatever their corollary is of what I'm feeling and say how it makes them feel, that really helps a lot. It does. And Gladys says, it's hard to watch a loved one or your friends in pain. It brings back memories of your own, but you need to be there for them because they were there for you. And Janine says, to help the child, to shield a child from loss, children pick up much more than adults realize, including them in the grieving process will help the adult to heal. I guess that we're getting back to that question.
Getting back to the children. So I'm going to give a really short developmental talk about children, just a very short one, because I don't want to get too academic. I love this conversation. I really do. But what I want to say is that the most important thing for everyone to remember about children is that our brain as an adult and a child's brain is not the same thing. I just threw a pen at Molly. Sorry, Molly. I'm sorry I threw the pen at you. I got excited. Is that, people think of children as mini me. They think of children as having the capacity intellectually or emotionally to hold what an adult holds, and it's not the case. Do you know that when you're in your adolescence and early 20s, say, that literally the gray matter in your brain grows. So your brain changes and grows, and then you're able to conceive of things like time and forever, which is a significant concept in death, right? Which a young child, the abstraction of it doesn't exist. What exists for them is the pain. The primitive or the real guttural authentic response. That's what exists. And a lot of times when you get into slightly middle-aged children, like from maybe 7 to 10 or 7 to 12, they're really looking at us as role models. So as difficult as that may sound, that's how human beings learn. We learn from each other in a social way, as well as in an authentic way. So really quickly, like if you're talking about an infant, a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a baby, basically, there is no way a baby can understand death. They don't understand any concept of time, right? Even tomorrow or later today, a 2-year-old can't understand that. So there's no way for them to understand that someone is gone forever. And a child, a really young child, will continue to look for that person. And that's normal. And what you see in the response from a very, very young person is just being kind of exposed and re-exposed to the, aversive stimuli of death until they adapt their behavior to the person not being there. But you find a lot of, really young children just searching. They won't eat the same way. They won't sleep the same way, but it's not something they can intellectually understand. Even 2 to 4-year-olds, so let's move up a little bit, like 2 to 4-year-olds still does not have the time concept. So they cannot understand forever, but they understand separation at this point. So they understand that's separating. They are going to start responding to adults in their environment. So how adults are reacting, and they may show confusion. A 2 to 4-year-old may get regressive. Somebody mentioned this yesterday. So start doing baby behaviors. That's very normal. When a child gets frightened, is to regress. And they may have bad dreams and not sleep or eat just the same way. A 4 to 7-year-old, just kind of very quickly, a 4 to 7-year-old is what we call egocentric. which means that in their mind, the world is revolving around them, their perceptions, and their experiences. So they have kind of a magical thinking. This person died because of something I did, or because of something that's not attached. I got a special doll and then this person died. And they may connect events that are not connectable for us, but it's because everything, they haven't developed altruism, which is the ability to kind of put yourself outside of yourself. It's a very normal period of development. So what you may see is from a 4 to 7 year old is a lot of questioning, like repetitive questioning. And it's part of them trying to understand, right? Just try to understand what's going on. You may see the confusion and the regression and kind of a lot of extreme behavior or emotions where they just kind of begin to just get overwhelmed. But also a 4 to 7 year old and up is going to start modeling their behavior on people they feel close to in their environment. So if someone in the environment is shutting down, the child may think that's the right thing to do, to shut down. If someone is very expressive, they may also be very expressive. So you begin to see those kind of connections. The 7 to 10 year old is now beginning to understand finality. So they're beginning to have more of a past, future, present kind of orientation. And I'll do this really quick, but what they do is they still have some magical thinking. In other words, death happens, but not to me, not to my family. It happens to old people and sick people. So it stays away from them. So that's kind of a very typical way for a preschool kid or an early school kid to kind of feel about death. But they're
wait, are you talking about 7 to 10? Because that's not preschool.
No, early school, early in school.
All right. Okay.
You know, first grade, second grade, third grade. And notice now they're being exposed to their peers. So we begin to see kind of that concern with, this is what my peers are doing. And this goes on 10 to 12, right? I don't want to be different than my peers, so I'm going to bury my grief. You know, I'm the one who lost a parent. No one else here lost a parent. I can't show that because it makes me different than my peers. That's really a significant issue because a child at that age is attaching to their peer group as something very strong. And so it goes on and on like that developmentally. Was that helpful at all for people to understand kids? Some kids you can explain all you want. They're just not able to do it cognitively at that point.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it was helpful for me. I'm going to read some of the chat. Andrew asked, at what point is altruism usually developed? So I guess you said they didn't have it when they were up to 7, so probably between 7 and 10, or between...
So altruism can kind of come in as early as 5 or 6. It can happen. People always argue with me about developmental. So here's the thing about developmental. All we're talking about are averages, right? So you guys know there are people who develop altruism. You can find a 4 or 5 year old who is enormously kind and concerned and sweet and outside of their own level of comfort. But you can find a 6 or 7 or 8 year old who isn't quite there yet, who later becomes more altruistic. So usually it's around 5, 6, 7, 8, that there's just the beginnings of that kind of altruistic way. And you know, how many of us have had adolescents in our households where altruism is not there too much. It's still very egocentric.
There's also that period where in adolescence where there's pruning. So you talked about the brain growing in early adulthood, but that's also because something that a child understood very well at 11 or 12, they don't understand when they're 13, 14, 15, 16 because of the pruning. And so like, you know, consequences, natural consequences. Why did you do this? A 11-year-old can answer, and a 16-year-old will look at you and say, I don't know. And they're not lying. Like it's just that's that stage of development. But I guess I want to read some of the chat part. Jeanette
Yeah.
is saying, I remember when my husband passed away, my son was 1 year old and he still remembered the funeral, but he's
Wow.
21 years old now. And he told me, I remember everything, but I didn't realize that that was my dad's passing away until right now. So he's 21 and he has the memory of what was the funeral, but he didn't realize that it was his father's funeral until he was 21, that event was what he remembered, you know.
That it just shows what a marker that was. You know, memory typically comes in around 3 years old, really permanent memory, you know, so that's very impressive. It really must have.
Well, and Amy says, my mother hated being referred to as a little girl whose mother is dead at school. You know, like that was, and when you were talking about 10 to 12-year-olds and, you know, peer group and not wanting to be different. I guess when I was listening to you, Judith, because I was listening to it in relation to the question I asked and which Kara asked yesterday. And I was thinking, how does this apply to how do we protect our children when we're grieving? And what I was thinking, and tell me if I'm off base, which was with a baby, since they're not going to understand anything that's going on, but they're going to be able to feel your energy, it is probably important to have someone assisting, if you can, to have someone assisting with caring for the baby that isn't dysregulated, you know, that could be very helpful. I mean, because they're not going to understand it, they're just going to feel what you're feeling and not be, and that might be upsetting to them.
That is, I think that's incredibly, makes so much sense to me, because one piece of advice I had was to provide consistency.
Well,
you know,
I mean, but the other thing is, what I'm saying is like, so, but for what you said, for a 4 to 7 or 7 to 10-year-old who's watching what you're doing, then being honest and saying, you know, mommy is really sad right now and it's okay. You know, sometimes you're sad, you know, if it's not something that they're grieving, like if it's a divorce, I mean, there's their grief and then there's your grief, right?
Right.
So if your grief is different from their grief, I mean, you talked about how to be there with them when they're suffering, but in terms of their being with you when you're suffering, it sounds like it's really important to just be clear and honest and boundaried, but not to put it on them, not to put your grief
Makes
on
total
them.
sense.
Right?
Not to put it on them, not to expect them to be able to understand at the same level or in the same way that you are. But to be authentic makes a lot of sense to me at the same time.
Yeah, it's reassuring to say, mommy's really sad, you know, because this happened, you know, or whatever, mommy's really sad, but you know, it's okay to be sad and I'll be okay, you know, like to kind of not make it permanent, you know, like since they don't understand permanent anyway, it probably is, you know. Anyway, I really felt like it was a good question from yesterday. So I just wanted to like.
Excellent.
And I don't know if other people have experiences with what did you do when you were grieving, like Janan, what did you do when you were grieving and you had small children? You know, how did you handle it? How do people handle grieving with children or grieving in front of children or, you know, assisting children with their grief? I think that many of you probably have experience with this. So would be love to hear your wisdom about it. And feel free to raise your hand because it's a lot to write in a chat.
And we talked about, you know, during the very first one of this on Monday, that it's really okay for us to be silent as a group for a moment as we kind of process the rich conversation that's happening. It's okay to kind of step back for a minute and say, well, what does that mean to me? And is it something I can share? You know, we certainly can fill in more information, but it's so important to give you a chance to have that, to allow this to be your conversation.
So that the question to the group is, anybody, where do you want to go from here in terms of watching others grieve? Do you want to share your experiences, or are there questions you have? Or do you just want Judith to tell you her top 10, her top 10? Tammy, the biggest things I focus on with my kids was keeping things as normal as possible and being honest and talking about feelings.
That makes so much sense.
Anna has her hand raised. So Anna, we'd love to hear you.
Hi, you guys. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make a comment. I've been listening to all that she has been telling us. I will say that my grandson, when COVID first started, I used to see him on a daily basis. And when COVID started, because of my age, they kind of made my grandson stay away from me. Mm-hmm. And so we would do FaceTime, but my grandson would get mad and angry and throw the phone and says, "That's not my grandmother." I mean, they were having a lot of issues. So when I'm talking about, like when you're losing somebody, and he kept saying, "You're dead, Grandma. You're dead." And I'm like, "No, I'm not dead. I'm alive." "Well, I can't see you, Grandma. That's just a picture." He could not relate that he was still seeing me. So we ended up having to bring him back into the dynamics because it was taking a toll on him, and then it started taking a toll on me. So I think we were both going into like a depression, like a death in the family, even though it did not happen. And once he got back, he came back to normal. But it's funny, for the last year, he keeps asking me, "Grandma, are you going to die? Because on TV, there's so much stuff about COVID that you don't know what these little brains are thinking." So it's very interesting. I just wanted to share this, how people don't even think about COVID because they hear all these people dying and all this other stuff. It can make a big impact. And, my thing is, I just wanted to share this, that little ones, when they don't see their grandparents that they're used to, it can take a toll on them. The behavior changes, things change. I just want to make that comment.
Oh, thank you so much, Anna. That's such a profound reaction that is it a boy that he had?
Yes, it's my grandson, but when I say I raised him, on the first year of his life, I used to put him down to bed because his mother, it's a strange situation, but he visits me at least 2 or 3 times a week, and he spends the night. But he was missing the touch. The phone was not sufficient enough for him. I mean, he was like, "That's not my grandma. My grandma holds me. My grandmother touches me." So it was almost like mourning a death. But now he's in this kick that I'm like, why does he keep asking me if I'm dying or if I'm going to be gone, And I keep telling him, "Don't worry about it,
How old is he, Anna?
He's 5, but he's a pretty smart 5-year-old because
you know what? It makes total sense to me, actually. It's such a profound reaction, but it actually makes a lot of sense to me because, the whole thing about seeing someone on a screen is an abstraction. It's 2-dimensional, but you're there and you're talking. And I do think he's really smart, because I think there was a sense he realized that this piece of material is not you.
Right.
And so it created a distance in his mind, or a distraction. And I think you're doing the right thing. He may ask you in a repetitive way because it made him afraid of the loss of you, to just calmly, reassure him. At some point, he'll be able to abstract and understand it. But for now, it's just, it's kind of that basic, he did lose you in a way. He lost you during the period of time he couldn't see you.
Well, and it's also like when we hear that like 80% of communication is nonverbal or something, that when you think of like just how he is wired, and that for him, like the tactile, being held, being touched, being in physical proximity was the key to the relationship for him. And this, like in terms of bonding, just like early childhood and bonding, that smell is really important, like for bonding. I mean, it's not, you hold the child close, but it's really, as mammals, it's a olfactory process that's involved in bonding. So it makes sense to me that his wisdom is about, like, what is it to really be with a person? It's about smelling, it's about touching, it's not just sight, it's not just sight, right? So,
well, I will say that his parents are older, and what she's been doing is making booklets of every year in case any of us should happen to leave this world. And she's also recorded stuff. So that's where he could not, he's like, that's not my grandma. I want my grandma. My grandma, like you said, Kathy, I held him. He needed that interaction. And this is what's happening with COVID. Nobody's having the interactions that we used to have before. So it can be like a loss to these children.
Yeah. And when I think, thank you so much, Anna. When I think back to like my early memories of my grandmother, like I can still smell what her house smelled like in my mind's eye, in my memory. I can still remember the food that she cooked for me and what that tasted like. I still remember what it felt like to be hugged by her, or to be in her arms, or to be following her into the garden or whatever. And so I really think it's important, for us to realize that, like for us, we can take the abstraction as adults, but it probably, a lot of our memories are very physical, of our, I want to get to Janan too. Janan says, it depends on my culture. My culture allows the children to be with an adult in all activities, even when we're visiting the graveyard. We did that on purpose, thinking this way is letting the child cope and grieve in the future so that they would have the memories, presumably. And Janine says, as an early learning professional, we train teachers and parents to give children only information they can handle. If you don't know what this sounds like, seek help in children's books, parenting classes, grief shares, etc. Also understand that children are going through the process of grief along with you, and any change within the home affects the child. So divorce, moving, incarceration, etc., they're going to be affected by that. And so, and thank you again for, Janine, I love the way that you said, if you don't know what this sounds like, seek help, Google it, essentially, to like seek help in children's books, parenting classes, grief shares. Like there is such a wealth of information on how to process grief with children, and it's available in the public domain. So, and Tammy says, so true about the smells. There are certain smells that will whisk me right back to my childhood with my grandma.
So much. I related to that whole story you just told so clearly. And I just want to make a comment on the cultural aspect, which is that it's, so the study of death, when that became more popular, so to speak, they did focus on the fact that in Western society, we're not Western society, but in the kind of new colonized society, there was a denial of death rather than a inclusion. Whereas like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talked about how she grew up in Europe, and when someone passed away, they usually passed away in their home. People came to visit them before they passed away, children, anybody. People were present to the body wasn't changed or make-upped or any, so that death, was a more natural part of life. It was not in her experience when she came to the United States that people died on medical units, or people died in hospitals based on medical staffing decisions rather than on someone just being in the home surrounded by people.
And I vibed with Janand also that, that in the rituals of the tradition and in traditional Judaism too, the children are included. They're not the focus. I mean, I think that that's also a situation that kind of an odd moment in history that sometimes in prevalent culture now, everything is very child focused, and you're all concerned about what's happening for the child and what to do for the child. And I think that in other kind of situations and cultures, the child is part of the family and part of the community, but the child is learning what to do and how to be based on what the adults are doing. And I know that was much more the way that I remember in my childhood watching the adults, like when they would have parties, or like we would be supposed to go to bed, but watch the adults downstairs and what are they doing, and it wasn't like everything was around what did I want for dinner? Dinner was made for the family and we ate it or we were hungry. It wasn't like, oh, if you don't want that, we'll get you a peanut butter sandwich, or we'll go. They weren't making 5 dinners, for everybody. So I think there's also like the way, I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not trying to judge it. I'm just saying, like, I think there are way different ways of including children across traditions and cultures other than, being very child focused,
Right. And I think another thing you're talking about is just exposure to life. And then exposure, if you watch a child, they get exposed to something and then they play about it. They're play acting it. And then they get exposed to something and you see them playing with their friends about it. And that often happens with death as well.
Awesome. Well, Judith, we have a few more minutes left. Do you want to do your top 10?
This is another just random thing. This does not have anything to do with being an expert about anything. But I asked myself the question, if I were giving advice on watching other people grieve, what's the first 10 things that come out of my head? So I'm hoping this is helpful. But number 1 and number 2 are deeply connected. And number 1 is ask questions. And number 2 is listen. Ask questions and listen. So one thing that happens is we all get kind of mute, or we're afraid to ask questions, or we don't want to bother the person. But it's actually quite an act of compassion to say, how are you feeling? And then to listen, to not kind of have an idea or think you have to guess. People, the expression of what's going on is just so important and such an act of caring. And then the third thing is also connected, which is, if possible, if you can set aside your preconceptions when you're with someone who's grieving. So all of us do this thing called scripting. We have a script in our head about what's going to happen when we experience things. And what's really unfair about scripting, it prepares us, but at the same time, we don't let people follow a different script sometimes. That's that control issue again. So if we can ask the question, listen, and then not pre-script it, don't decide what it's going to be or what it should be. I had a friend who always said to me, don't should on yourself or don't should on other people. Just listen to what actually is the situation. Number 4 is exactly what we were talking about, allow space. So we talked yesterday about grief time, how that's different than regular time. And in order to adapt to grieving time, we need to give people space and time to not speak, time to speak, just allowing that space, like Kathy's beautiful description of the circle is such an incredible, sacred and meaningful gift. And number 5 for me was just express concern. It's okay to be worried. It's okay to care. It's nice to be worried about. It doesn't mean people are responsible for your worry, but it means that you're thinking of them. And it's okay to express that. Number 6 is also connected to what we've been talking about all these days, which is prepare yourself for oscillation. So we said that oscillation is those waves of emotion that come naturally with grieving. So one thing that can be really disappointing when you're watching someone grieve is, well, on Monday, they were really good. They were coping with things. They were okay. But then you see them Thursday night and they're ready to commit suicide. You know, they can't cope. It's over. It's done. And you're like, but you were okay on Monday. So that's natural, actually, not to be suicidal, but it's not, well, yeah, actually it is. But anyway, that's another topic. It's natural to have the waves. So we need to prepare ourselves to experience that. And if we do feel frustration and anger within ourselves, which we will, to just make space for that for yourself, you know, make space to hear that, but it's not always good to share it. Number 7 is what Kathy was talking about, create safety. You know, always creating, you need to be a safe person as you watch other people grieve. So safe from judgment, safe from unreasonable expectations, safe from their own judgments of themselves, a physically safe place if they don't have one. So that idea of creating safety. Number 8 for me is remember that no two people are alike in the grieving process. So my 2 favorite things, metaphors or analogies to help think about that is snowflakes, if you live in a northern region, or fingerprints, right? They say no 2 snowflakes, when you put them under a microscope, have the same beautiful fractal patterning. They're all so different, right? But fingerprints are the same. That's why we identify people from fingerprints. And the grief process is like that as well. So make space in yourself to learn something new about that person, to allow them to be unique. Number 9, so we're almost done. Number 9 is try not to project your own anxiety. So your own emotions or anxiety, you should do this, you should do this, don't do that. This is how we do it in this household. None of those things are necessarily helpful approaches. It's just us projecting our feeling out into the world. So if we can hold that, and again, go back to listening, then that's a really helpful thing. And the last thing is called it's okay. So here's the list of it's okay. It's okay to just say, I'm here. It's okay to feel awkward. It's okay to feel uncomfortable when other people are grieving. It's okay to feel helpless or clumsy. And it's okay to know, it's okay to not know how other people will receive you in making your best effort. So all of those things are, it's okay. And I noticed the time, we're at the end of our time.
Well, thank you so much, Judith. This was a fabulous time together, and I love the top 10. I'm just screenshotting them, and I'm gonna keep them. And please fill out the ending poll as you're leaving, and join. Tomorrow we have a Grief Compass Cafe. So using our new deck. Monday, we're gonna have a 30-minute conversation on physical vitality and body-based grief. Alejandro Salinas is going to be here on Tuesday and Thursday and talk about grief, dreams in grief and dying. And Alexandra is going to be here for a 30-minute conversation on Wednesday about financial vitality after the death of a loved one. The finances, you know, positive and negative. And then on next Friday is Juneteenth, and Be Strong Families is off for Juneteenth, and we have no webinar. So thank you for being here today. Look forward to seeing you in the future, and check out Grief Compass, Navigating Trauma and Loss Cafe Booster Pack. Judith was one of the architects. We're extraordinarily grateful to Dr. Judith Ehrman-Shapiro for today, for all the other contributions she's made for this whole week, and for the Grief Compass. So thank you very much, Judith, I'm sorry, and everybody else for being here and keeping the safe space. Lots of love.
Thank you, Kathy.